let's move on to this assignment 7. And as I have probably described this already, this is one of the ER modeling case study actually developed by my colleagues and mentor, Dr. Dinesh Batra, and I think he is about to retire in less than 5 years from Florida International University. So this was one of the first, and actually, he wrote a book, textbook, with another famous MIS professor, and this case was including one of the textbook there. But anyway, this particular case is a very good case study for, especially for the graduate level database class, because it presents a very typical modern organization problem, require database support, and this is the project management problem. And project management software, of course, is widely available in many organizations, but still, that at least from my personal consulting experience, anything related to project management, scheduling, calendar, the job assignment is one of the most complicated operation, if you want to call this, in a typical organization. And when I was a consultant in 2013, 2013, and my company, the company I was helping, has a potential customer, and the potential customer is Ernst and Young, the accounting firm from their Australian branch, try to build a scheduling software, actually project management software for internally. And of course, they already have other project management software, Microsoft Project or Microsoft SharePoint, and some other, say, a modern tool that they use, like Doodle. I think Doodle was available already back then, so they're using Doodle to figure out the available time for each person and try to map it to the environments of their SharePoint environment. And still, they face a lot of trouble with they try to assign an accountant, an auditor, to a particular project, and somehow that auditor is double booked. So he or she was assigned to a particular customer to audit their inventory, and at the same time, his name or her name show up on the other another. So there always conflict, and there are a lot of small, this time conflicting problem that may involve in the project management. So this is a project with reasonably short, but complex enough for us to discuss. And the recommendation for you working on this assignment is not to be too complete, right? So if you want to be very complete in working on this project, this will take probably, and I've been looking at this project for several years already, and every other years I'll bring this up and become the assignment that you are working with. But every time I look at this, there are always something that I cannot make my decision to decide how to model this particular relationship, right? So without further saying, but read this, you can probably have a more sense. But basically, it's a project management versus some sort of equipment or some sort of a product management, vendor management scenario. So there are two situations here. One is project management, the other is transaction management, right? So we will try to do that. Now, before we start moving on the how to do this model, the traditional way of doing this is you read through the description or a problem domain, and we try to identify something what we call the candidate entity or candidate class. And within the candidate class, we select and try to make decision on which one of those should be in to represent this domain of the problem. And that is a traditional way of doing things. And many of you probably, if you have taken any undergraduate class, this is the way that you are taught to build a model. But in this class, especially over the time I've been teaching this class, or database, and I found that it will be more realistic realistic one is you don't have any chance to design a database. Second, it's all when you have a chance to use ER model, use ER model to understand the data structure. So it will be a better idea for me at least to share with you, make sure that you are in this more practical practitioner's minds as to see how they see a particular problem by borrowing something what we call the pattern design. So again, pattern is a solution to a type of problem. And last week or last lecture we had, I introduced a few pattern, and I want to review those pattern. And one of the most important pattern I keep emphasizing is this something what we call the line item order pattern, right? So you have a transaction called a fact table in the middle, and you have two entities involved in the transaction, and you have something that considered to be the line item that involved in the transaction, right? So this is the example of sale. If you put registration here, and this item become course, the customer becomes student, the salesperson maybe become advisor, right? So that would change the scenario. So if you change this order to say every month, if you work for a company, you receive salary. So you have salary, what do you call this? Receive salary and receive salary. Then within the salary, you have different component of the salary, hourly salary, bonus, or regular monthly salary, or some sort of award money. So it can be have multiple items, and each employee can be one of the entity as well. And you also have this supervisor or human resource manager try to supervise this. So very quickly you have a salary issue in sort of a situation. So this is the one that you have to remember. The second one that you have to use in this particular problem domain is this one. And this is a typical association pattern or so-called project assignment pattern. So the project assignment pattern is a ternary relationship. So you have a project, you have a client, you have an architect, and they are all belong to the same assignment. Right? So this is where we're going to be starting. So instead of starting your project or the assignment by identify candidate entity, we will just build this pattern first into our model. So go back to our model. Before we do anything else, right? I'll delete this the three things that we have here and start with a new one. This may take a little bit longer time because we are doing this on the fly, and we will create. Let me switch back to the pattern one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 entity. One is, and all three of them, look at the line. All of them are ID dependent or so-called identifying relationship, ID dependent relationship. Right. So client, architect, assignment, project, and obviously we are not dealing with architect. We're dealing with a software project. So architect is that no engineering project. So we probably need to change the architect to something else. So very quickly we have to create 1, 2, 3, 4. And so this will be assignment. And I'm not going to be more very specific about assigning attribute. I think that part you can easily done by yourself. So we have some kind of project. We have a client. And we have I think engineer. Okay, let me double check the problem to make sure that I'm correct. Right. So If you are very picky like me, then now you can try to move this shape along the geometric shape of the. If you do not enable that snap and glue feature, you cannot do this, right? You will have difficulty of moving this line around. But once you enable this snap to the geometric shape, then you can do the thing that I'm doing here. So we have one part of that already, right? So and usually ER diagram in your typical project or typical assignment, you will try to draw this into one big model, and don't try to do that in here, because very quickly you will see a diagram very big, not be able to fit into one diagram. The second thing I would try to do here is that in our for this particular assignment, let's just call this project assignment transaction model. Let's create another one, and this is called the employee model. Employee model. All right. So employee model, the reason I open that employee model is because if you read the project description a little bit more, you will find there are a lot of description about how to keep track of the employee. Right. 500 employee has some sort of skill. They have a relationship to one another. They are married to one another. They have a job title and so on and so forth. Right. So this is the thing. So this is the second part, is the employee management. The third part, you can probably see what I'm doing now. I'm trying to cut this particular assignment into 3 small segments, and I'm dealing with one segment at a time. And the employee management, sort of employee relationship management, how do we model that, is another problem you're approaching. Again, in a traditional way, you would just do, but the method I'm recommending to you will be something like this. If you remember from chapter 5, we have this pattern here. We have this engine box car pattern. We also have this thing called the employee management, recursive relationship management sort of type of employee. And this is a pattern, means that a lot of people are using it. It's a solution. And it's actually represent, and this particular ER diagram represent the organization structure we mentioned last week or last lecture. So what I would do is I would do something similar to this. I will create an employee and try to make sure that I know they are managed in this way instead of creating multiple. One of the trap for the student for this class, for this assignment, is that you tend to create relationship and try to capture different position. Like in here, we identify something called engineer, and later you know that this will be changed to employee. Right? And now explain why. And the employee will have an attribute to describe what kind of employee they are, what's their position and title, right? So let me just, without further ado, just create an entity here, and this will be, if you look at this will be one-to-many relationship. It could be many-to-many, could be one-to-many, but typically one-to-many because it's a hierarchical structure, so we'll just have one-to-many relationship. And if you want to use the line here, actually we have that already, and we can just paste that particular shape here. And in Visio, there are multiple ways of keeping track of your notation and make sure that you can reuse it. And one of the things to do is, let me kind of show you how to do that in this occasion. If you go to your stencil, the quick shape stencil, you can go to more shape, and there's a category called my shape, right? And the default is favorite, so you can open up favorite, and this is the place you can create customized shape. And in this case, we have a customized shape that because we changed the thickness of the relationship. If you want to reuse this one, once you have created this, you can drag and drop to the favorite, and this will become my ER relationship will be a reusable shape that you can reuse it all the time. So this is Crowdfoot. You can always open it up, and you can go to favorite and drag and drop. You have a relationship right here. And this case will be unary relationship. This will be a relationship similar to this. Oh. Okay, this is better. Okay, so that will be a relationship. And in this particular case, we want to probably name the relationship a little bit by double click and say this is manage relationship, right? Manage. And if you look at the pattern again, it's a non-identifying relationship, right? Non-identifying relationship. And so we'll go back and change that to non-identifying, so that become a dashed line, so that will fit in there. And if you keep reading, there is another thing describing that we have a potential relationship called a married to one another. One employee married to another employee. That could be a potential relationship as well. So let me create another one by drag and drop the line here. And this you need to customize or actually make it look better by yourself by practicing a few times. And this one, if you think about the relationship, and by the way, I need to name this relationship employee. And later we'll go back and try to check to see what kind of attribute we should have here. And so we have employee, we have this relationship here. Then this is called a marriage relationship. So we can say married to. Okay, one person is married to another person. And the next thing we do is, this is a place we can think about what kind of multiplicity we should have. One person can marry to no person, or at most one person, at least under the United States law, that you cannot marry to two persons. So so we have one. This is called the optional one relationship. So one person married to another person is optional and one. So this will be 0 or 1. And on the ending side will also be 0 or 1. So this is optional one relationship. Are they identifying? No, they are not identifying. As a matter of fact, they are strong entities, or not. They are not identifying with each other. So for employee, we have actually two unary relationship. And the next thing to do is, I will only do this for employee. I will not go through the entire modeling process. The rest of the job you should be doing that by yourself. And is to look at what attribute go into the employee, right? So we have a social security number and a name, and we need to have a some sort of ID, right? So we can use employee ID or social security number or something. This is part of the design or conceptualize. You can have a more flexibility to do that. And employee has a job title, right? A job title, and they probably have a so it's not required. We need to have a date of marriage and something along that. And I'll go back to modify that when needed. And so that's that for now. Let me try to go back and put in some sort of an employee ID here. And this is the place that we have some ambiguity, and you can choose to do whatever you want to do. Say for example, you can call this social security number, because in a requirement document, the case is actually a requirement document. We say that we have a social security number, but some people do not have a social security number. So here we have a design decision. We can say, okay, employee ID is a social security number, or you can design something else. you can design something like employee ID is a surrogate key, and you can create additional social security number. In this case, SSN should be sufficient because it's written in the case. Or if you want to be more explicit, you can say social security number. That will be helpful as well. And we need to have a job title. So job title here is where that when you have an engineer, then this had to be limited to engineer in your particular problem domain. So that is the required thing. And each employee need to have a set of skill. So another entity will be skill. Right? And the relationship between these two will be many to many. So you can build again a relationship of many to many, and think about the cardinality among them. In this case, employee may have no skill or many skill. Every skill can belong to no employee or many employee. So probably need to identify this as ending notation 0 or more. So we have many to many in this particular situation. That's good enough. This model will not be good enough for implementation because many to many now cannot be implemented. But that is something that we need to modify. And one of the challenge to you is that if you look at this marriage relationship, we already modeled the marriage relationship with this unary one-to-one relationship. But the requirement here says no record of the marriage is required if employee is spousal. It said no, it's not required, but it's optional, right? But it does have a requirement that says the date of marriage and the person who is married need to be stored. Okay, so the challenge to you is where do I put that particular piece of information? Right? That I will not give it to you in our lecture today, and try to think about it. The hint to do that is that it's very similar to many-to-many implementation to one-to-many. So you have to break that relationship into one-to-many and generate a something what we call intersection table. Right? So that's something we need to do. So that's the second part of the assignment 7 you need to work on. The third part is called equipment management. Right. So let me read a problem a little bit, tell you what do I mean by that. So this is the problem we are looking at, the third part of the project or the assignment part. It's called a procurement problem. So you're buying some sort of equipment, and the department will buy equipment from vendor, and vendor will supply equipment to department, right? So there is a trap and try to trap you into this particular situation by building this many-to-many relationship. But again, as I emphasizing it over and over again in today's exercise, we are using pattern as a solution, as a quick, is actually a better way to build ER diagram. So looking at procurement, which pattern should we look at? The answer is, I'm talking to myself. That's good. I learned this over the career of teaching online student, because you don't. It's kind of like talking to your audience through a radio station. Not all the time that people are listening to you or respond to you, but so I have to imagine myself. All right. So going back to the model. So this is the pattern we're going to be looking at. So what we are doing here is the middle part, the fact table, is procurement, right? So we have department, we have vendor. So how do we build this model? The model very quickly has a solution of a line item pattern. And look at how many things we have here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, right? One, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm pretty much building the model based on pattern, based on this line item pattern. And the middle one is called procurement. You buy something, procurement, depending on how you locate it. And on the left upper corner, the customer is not customer. It's in the transaction, it's department, right? And in this particular transaction, we are dealing with the vendor is vendor. And the item here is equipment. This will be, look at how they name the line item, order line item. So this will be procurement line item. And then you look at the notation here. Non-identifying on top, only identifying is this one, right? So and many site is always on the transaction. Or in the middle part. So this is the middle entity. So this is many site. Many site is here, right? So that's that, and we need to change this to non-identified. I haven't figured out, I mean, try to be specific how these will be identified. And if you further read that each department will have employee, so we have to borrow the employee from here and put them in here. So the employee, where's my employee? Wrong one. So okay, but anyway, you probably see what I'm doing. So the basic structure to get you start working on the assignment is you gotta cut the project into 3 parts, and they are related. They are not separate project. They are not separate assignment. They are the same assignment. It's just that for each more like a transaction or scenario, we put them into one diagram. And of course, you can put them all together in one page. That is possible too, but you need a larger paper. And we have, in this case, a letter size paper here. It's not large enough. And you can, of course, go out of this boundary by creating a diagram much larger than the a letter size. But it's something that not very nice looking. So I would recommend that cut them into 3 pages, and each page you're dealing with this. And when you're looking at their relationship, you go to project management, you see employee here, you know that employee is linking to the second page because the employee entity are the same entity regardless you are in the first page or second page. And the employee also linked to the department in this particular page, and you have this model sort of connecting to each other and be almost ready. So what I have done today here is to sort of telling you or give you some 60% of the answer of this particular assignment already in the most efficient, most acceptable way, right? It's called a pattern design, ER diagram building method. And we also learn some of the visual trick on how to use this notation. And that pretty much served my purpose here. Any question until now on building this ER diagram?
Professor, line or dash line are not identifying, and they are weak relationship or strong relationship.
Okay, so this is one of the very confusing concept introduced in chapter 5. So usually that the non-identifying represent we have the notation have to be very clear. First of all, the strong and weak are not referring to relationship, right? Strong and weak referring to entity. So strong entity usually have weak linkage to other entity. I don't know if that makes sense. Let me repeat that sentence one more time. Strong entities usually have weak linkage to other entity. Weak entity need to have a strong connection to other entity. Weak depends on something. So whenever you see that a solid line, it means on one side it has a weak entity, because that weak entity needs a strong connection. So in this example, what you see on the diagram here is procurement line item is a weak entity, because this particular entity cannot exist unless you have procurement. So if you have not buying anything, then that line item will not even exist. It's kind of like our example of apartment have to belong to a building. So the procurement, whatever you buy, showing up on your receipt need to depends on that particular transaction. If the transaction does not happen, that line does not happen, right? So that is the concept of strong and weak entity. When it is used by your textbook to describe relationship, and this solid line is called the ID dependent relationship. Because if we try to do this here, let's say for example, if we use procurement number as a primary key, that procurement line item here need to have as a primary key as well as a foreign key. Right? So this is procurement number used as a primary key as well as foreign key in here. And why this is called identifying or ID dependent? Because this entity, in this case procurement line item, depends through ID, through the key, to the procurement. So it's called ID dependent. And VCO, they do not use ID dependence terminology. They use identifying these keywords here. So there are three levels of not complexity. It's just people use a different terminology, but they are referring to similar thing. But I hope that after the exam you will get more sense about it. And typically, if you do not model this correctly, you can still make your system work. Because in a typical working environment, usually we don't argue this identifying. This is argued only in a more higher level, more advanced database management topic, when we are very care about our data quality. If you care a lot about your data quality, then you have to be very careful of assigning or deciding on whether this should be identifying ID dependent or non-ID dependent. So the dot or dash line are non-ID dependent because the entity itself, they can exist independently by themselves. Each one of them are called strong entity. So department is a strong entity, it exists by itself. Vendor is a strong entity, it's just one vendor out there. If a vendor does not have a customer, it's still a company, it's still a vendor out there. And procurement itself, then in this case, is strong because that concept is transaction. It either happen or not happen. Equipment is also another strong entity. So we have these four strong entity, one weak entity here. And weak entity, we usually have the name called ID identifying. And actually, the fair way to say is ID identifying or ID dependent is the implementation of a weak entity with its relationship. So that's how so yeah, I guess that once you read it, after my explanation, you get some sense of it. But still, it's very easy to be confused, especially if you are the first time being exposed to this type of concept. But it is there. The concept is there. But one more time, take a look at the ID identify, right? Another easy way to identify this solid line or dash line is every solid line need to have a foreign key involved, right? So in this case, that you need to have this foreign key identified for the weak entity. Weak entity need to have a foreign key used as a primary key. That's the main differences. All right. I hope that's clear enough. All right. So you have about 60% of the model built, and your job now is to think about some other relationship there, and why it's how you want to be represented. Most of them will be assigned to the attribute that we identify. One more note before I close this particular lecture or recording here is that on the concept of employee. Oh, only job title is copied. Let me copy the entire employee here. Okay, so the point I'm going to be making is this. At the beginning of our model today in this segment is we model an entity called engineer. So if you look at engineer, this particular concept here. So of course you want to keep track of engineer, right? In an extended, if you go back to the ER model again, there is a relationship between these two models. And the relationship between them, it will be the inheritance of prime or so-called the archetype relationship in there. So you have a super type, you have a subtype. Super type is employee, subtype is engineer, right? Let me tell you where we refer to at the textbook. So this is a ID dependent archetype or archetype relationship, or something along the line. No, this is a multi-relationship. So if you look at this, employee and engineer, their relationship is sort of like this. That makes sense? So if you really want to model this engineer, this is how you're going to be modeled. So if you follow this, class, section, so class name, section number. And so in this case, we have employee, engineer. An engineer is obviously an employee. And in this case, you probably want to look at the pattern, right? Look at the pattern we are having here. Look at the section. When you have this subtype, in addition to the ID or the class name here, you have a section number. So in addition to employee ID here, you might need to have another primary key used as and probably call this engineer. Right, so maybe that's a mechanical engineer. Maybe that's the electronic engineer. Maybe that's a civil engineer. Maybe that's a computer engineer. You don't know, right? So there's engineering area, and there is a ID dependent relationship among them. Right. So if you draw this diagram here, so now we have employee, engineer. If the engineering concept is here,
Call it engineer area. Can I call it engineer ID? I'm just asking question.
you may this is engineer is the entity name. Engineer employee ID. Oh yeah, you can say this is engineer ID. Yeah, that's possible. You can say I know where.
Just want to make sure it is
That's fine. It's possible. It's a design job you can decide on because it's not described in the document. But based on the pattern, we learn that this is how it is model, so you can kind of mimic that model. Yeah, very good thinking actually there. Put engineer ID. So you have employee ID and engineer ID. You have two ID there, right? So once you have done this, now you can use in engineering specific instead of employee here in your project assignment. And the other thing is that the decision on entity and attribute a lot of time is arbitrary by the system designer, meaning that you and me, we are the professional already, right? So if you think about the engineer, the job title itself will already represent the concept of engineer. You can have an engineer, you can have manager, you can have accountant. Job title can be very specific to include both the engineer title as well as ID. You can probably even say engineer number one or something in the job title, right? So that is possible. So in the modeling world, this is exchangeable. Every attribute can be spin off as an entity. An entity can also be shrink into one attribute, right? And that concept, without further explanation, and it's called a multimorphism and sort of a overriding concept. But without explaining that explicitly, that's actually object-oriented concept. And the rule of thumb here is whenever you create an entity, you provide more flexibility to the model because you can expand and add attribute to the entity. When you put this into the attribute, it's more difficult for you to expand that concept further. So, but at the same time, if you put something into attribute, it's much easier to manage. You don't need to worry about the entity. The entity has multiple attributes. You need to query become more difficult, and so there's a trade-off between you want to build a concept into attribute or separate that into an entity, right? So that's pretty good actually. Good questions on and comments on the employee ID. So to summarize what we did today to approach the assignment is we use 4 different patterns from the textbook. One is the project assignment pattern. Second is the employee or hierarchical boxcar type of recursive pattern. The third one is the transaction pattern. The fourth one is archetype pattern. And using the pattern to map the concept we have in the assignment, it gives you a better design usually, because patterns are usually an agreed upon solution on a particular situation. All right. So this will give you a better assignment submission after watching this video. All right, let me stop the recording and